I'm Jake.
I'm Tom.
We are Velocities in Music. On this podcast, Tom and I discuss a wealth of topics pertaining to modern music, including artist deep dives and monthly and annual new music wrap-ups. Speaking of monthly new album wrap-ups, Tom.
That's what we're here to do today.
That is what we are going to do today. January 2016 wrapped up a little over a week ago. We got snowed in. We originally, we wanted to record this about a week ago, but the problem is Iowa's cold and you're trapped inside, and then it snows a whole bunch, and then you can't travel anywhere, and so that all happened, and it's really depressing. But we got extra listens in for January.
We did, and a lot came out right at the end of the month. What, like the 29th or something?
Yeah, Friday the 29th. So we have a lot of albums to go through today, but before we get started, you guys can help support Velocities in Music. Subscribe to this podcast on your favorite podcasting device to automatically get our latest podcast episode sent to your device each week. Also, Velocities in Music does not want your money yet. We also don't want to introduce ads to this podcast yet. Right now, we want you to share Velocities in Music with your family or friends whom you think would benefit from joining in on the music discussion Tom and I are trying to create. That's all we need.
Mm-hmm.
So, new albums in January.
Yep.
A lot came out, some big artists. Unfortunately, David Bowie died.
Yes.
That's, I think, like the big news, music-wise. A lot of people listening to Bowie this month. His new album came out, Blackstar.
Yep.
And I think that's a good way to kick off
Let's
our wrap-up. All right, so at the very beginning of the month, David Bowie released Blackstar.
Mm-hmm.
It was released the Friday before he died. He died like Sunday night.
Into Monday morning, somewhere in there.
Somewhere in there. And I listened, being a Bowie fan, I listened to this, right that Friday it came out.
Mm-hmm.
It was, very early in the year, so not a lot was coming out at the time. Yeah. And I was really excited to listen to Blackstar. And so this was the first 2016 album I listened to this year. And I took a bunch of notes on it, Tom, and all of those notes were written in present tense. And I just had to go through my notes and change it all to past tense because the poor guy died at the age of 69.
Yep.
And this guy's just a music legend. So obviously people have been talking about Bowie and this album Blackstar throughout the month, mainly because it, like, hidden in the lyrics of the album are kind of some references towards death and maybe like parting.
Absolutely.
This is kind of seen as a parting gift to his fans, That I think needs to be kept separate from the music of the record.
Yeah, that plays much more in the listening experience and the overall like emotional experience that people have when they're listening to this record. But I try to put myself in the mindset of listening to it that Friday it came out, while no one, the world and his huge number of listeners and followers didn't know that he was going to pass away.
And at that time, you just assumed he was going to keep doing what he's doing. He's David Bowie. He's a legend. He's going to just keep releasing solo records every few years, and they're going to always be brilliant. Like, you didn't think the end was just right there.
Right.
Super depressing.
I know.
All right. So, to talk about the music of Blackstar, this is a very experimental album. From a mood perspective, it's very gloomy and brooding, but not in a depressing way. Bowie created an experience that takes the listener to another world. He did so by creating expansively structured songs that he allowed to explore different sonic concepts, not adhering to, any typical songwriting formula. He used a lot of synths extensively on this record, and in huge layers with bigger sweeping lines behind flutters at the front of the mix. One of the most notable aspects of Blackstar to me was the drums, which are really spastic and driving, providing the songs with this just undercurrent of energy. It kind of reminded me of Earthling at times with the drums.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, what he does that I think is really great is you were talking about those sweeping synths, and that it creates this very kind of sedated and tranquil, albeit a little bit creepy kind of mood, especially like on the title track. And also Lazarus, I would say. But then you have these very frantic beats going on in the background that create this tension, and there's kind of a clash of worlds there. But once again, I mean, that's what Bowie's best at.
That's what he's always done, right? Yeah, my favorite track on this record was Sue, or In a Season of Crime. Just overall thought this was a really enjoyable record, and I've come back to it a couple of times throughout the month, specifically after hearing the news that Bowie passed away to hear, to listen to it with that context. And honestly, it made it a better experience. And that kind of plays into the fact that, an artist's history and the buzz around an artist and the context of which an album is released does in fact affect your listening experience.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And but I think it also goes beyond the simple context, because it also, of course, the knowledge of his own, impending death is really, I think, what drove a lot of the decisions behind the lyrics and behind the music on Blackstar.
For sure.
So, as listeners, we can't just attribute it to the fact that was our experience listening to it after he died, but we also have to take into account the fact that was Bowie's intent in creating this music. And so it was supposed to be part of the experience to begin with. If anything, when you think about it, those 3 days that people had the opportunity to listen to it without the context of his death was actually kind of a fluke. It almost goes against the whole current of the album, but I think that's part of what makes it so special and such a profound parting gift for Bowie.
On the day of execution, on the day of execution, only women even smile. At the center of it all.
The next album we're going to talk about from January is Hinds with their album Leave Me Alone. This is kind of lo-fi, reverbed out, kind of female-led beach punk. I don't really know how else to say it. But to me, this album was all about style. Either you're going to dig the style or you're not. And personally, I really did not like it. I think that the production style worked against the songwriting. I don't think the songwriting was that great to begin with, but the instrumentals had no definition. The vocals are just kind of these like disconnected yelps that usually there's multiple vocalists going at the same time that just felt to work against each other. Overall, not an enjoyable listen to me at all. I will certainly not be coming back to this one.
Tomicus, I completely agree with you. And honestly, like this album was kind of part and parcel with most other artists in this genre for me. But like these guys even took it a step farther. To me, this is all about the sound and the mood and little about the songwriting craft.
Yeah.
Hinds is trying so hard to fit into this genre. One thing that they are doing is they're really pushing the sloppy vocal presentation you were alluding to there, Tom.
Yeah.
They had I noticed they had multiple vocal tracks, and that like often were purposefully not sung very well or remotely in tune. The result is repulsive to me, and like I said, probably very intentional. They clearly meant for this to sound sloppy and careless, trying to emulate that carefree beach-going atmosphere. And it just didn't work for me. I'm really just not a fan of this record. All right, next up on our January 2016 wrap-up, we have Savages with their second record, Adore Life. Tom and I reviewed their 2013 record. Tom, what was that called?
Silence Yourself.
Oh, okay, I'll shut up. We reviewed Silence Yourself a couple years ago, and I remember really liking that album. It kind of caught us off guard. Savages are a band that have a lot of buzz around them, mainly because they're very much in that post-punk genre, but I think that label gets applied a bit too liberally because there's a lot more to Savages than just the genre of post-punk. And as far as Adore Life goes, from what I can tell, it's a very densely written record. They had a lot of focus on songwriting, and it's definitely more complex than their debut record, and builds on top of that foundational sound of driving prog rock with that post-punk sheen that gets them the label that they do. To me, I hear a lot of driving, distorted bass lines, clangy guitars, and frantic Geddy Lee-esque vocals. Several of these tracks really hit me with just this wall of sound, resulting in a very dynamic effect. Adore Life, to me, feels even more engaging and, to me, wonderfully enjoyable. Definitely, I've come back to this one a couple times this month.
I even liked it better than their debut, which I liked quite a bit. To me, this represents a pretty classic sophomore move, going from the debut album to the second album, where their first album, you could tell that they were really trying to get their feet wet with what their sound and their style would be. Because of that, I think it came off as much more aggressive, whereas Adore Life, rather than just just, simple aggression. It's more tactful. I would describe it more as brooding or kind of haunting. They're trying to get a little bit more poignant emotion in there,
right,
rather than just being loud and abrasive, which actually, that makes it sound like Silence Yourself was the most loud and abrasive album of that year or something, which wasn't the case. But I just think that they're really putting a lot more thought into it now, and I really like the result. Next up, we've got the new album from post-rock group Tortoise. The album is called The Catastrophist? Catastrophist? I guess I'm not really sure. That's not a word you hear a whole lot.
Is that a word?
I'm not sure, honestly. I would pronounce it as catastrophist, but kind of a neat little word there.
Fair.
But Tortoise is a great post-rock band, been around since the 90s. They had a couple of classic albums with Millions Now Living Will Never Die and TNT. At least those are the two that I come back to the most and probably hear the most buzz about. But they've got a slew of other great albums as well. They're hard to describe because they're kind of all over the place, not unlike Mogwai, but I would say a little less hard rock and then Mogwai, incorporate some jazz elements and so on. On this record, they're leaning a little bit more towards the electronic side. One of the first things you hear on the album is kind of an interesting, sharp electronic beat. But as you listen through it, there's a lot more to it than that. There's still some great guitar lines, some great atmosphere. But it's a little bit sparse. Things, it's not really like it's all just reverbed out and washed together. Overall, I found this to be a really pleasant sounding record. It's fun to listen to. It's enjoyable, but it's not overly engaging. There's kind of some blah moments. I will say, though, I actually liked it a little bit better on second listen.
Tom, pleasant is a great word for this. To me, this is creative post-rock that doesn't follow any formula or structure and is fairly progressive in what it's striving to achieve. To me, post-rock is most potent when an artist achieves an emotional warmth with the listener, but that's not what Tortoise is all about. These guys are trying to make thoughtful, heady post-rock that conveys a certain mood but never tries to connect with your soul. And I think that's totally fine, and this record is very enjoyable, but it just never really lit me up. Next up, we have the third record from American singer-songwriter Eleanor Friedberger, New View. Tom, we reviewed her debut album back in 2011, and I remember really liking Eleanor's voice, but not really loving the album altogether, but noting that she had potential. Mm-hmm. This is now her third record, and, it's I gotta say, I'm just going to come out and say I was not a fan of this record. Yeah. Found it to be pretty boring. New View must have been inspired by Eleanor moving to an apartment in a dirty Rust Belt city that has, this quaint balcony overlooking the tops of several abandoned factories, because it's boring as shit rotting in a dump. I don't get it, man. Like, to me, this just feels completely zapped of any energy or inspiration. The songwriting ideas are tired. The tempo is so slow. The vocals, and this is the most disappointing thing, considering Eleanor has a very nice voice, but they just lack any pizzazz or gumption to make you care. The guitars rarely create any interesting melodies. The album's biggest success is that it's not overly offensive in any one way, but it's also so boring and lacking in so many ways that it's not worth your time. Yeah,
she went from being this kind of charismatic, quirky indie darling with Fiery Furnaces and even her first solo record to now I just feel like she's like Christine McVie from Fleetwood Mac if she took a horse tranquilizer to the neck. Like, there's just not much energy here. There's not much for me to latch onto, and it sucks because Eleanor Friedberger has such a unique quality to her voice. It has personality, but I just don't feel like she utilizes that. I don't feel like she ever really tries to do anything too out there with it, so it just ends up sounding safe, and for the most part, when people are sounding safe, to me, it comes off as boring.
Tom, can we just agree that we're not going to talk about Eleanor Friedberger again until she actually comes out with a good record?
Yep, let's make that pact.
Done.
Open season has begun. I may be over in the spring.
Next, we have Panic at the Disco with their new album, Death of a Bachelor. I think what they really mean is death of my soul, trying to listen to this junk. I hated this album. It was just detestable to me from the moment I put it on. Now, I will say the first couple tracks to me are clearly the worst. From there, it gets at least a little bit more tolerable. But man, I feel like these guys found a way to top themselves in badness. I mean, I've never been a huge fan of them. I liked Pretty Odd, all right. Their last album was, I thought, pretty bad, and I feel like this is even a step down from there. And I'm realizing now I'm just ranting. I'm not even talking about the music or the sound at all. So let's get to that. This is pop music. This is pop. Some might call it pop rock. I don't really know how much it rocks, but really, what puts me off is just the cheesy synths and beats, the lyrical content just trying to be this edgy, satirical, pop culture-driven garbage, and I just can't stand it.
To me, Tom, this is pop music, and for pop music, it's fairly creative pop music. One thing about this band that really bothers me, and I can't get over it, is they just simply rely and abuse cliches musically and lyrically.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it.
And it just makes the cliches just make it seem fake, and a lack of authenticity over the top of incredibly sugary vocal melodies and big choruses makes this really hard to take seriously. I can honestly say that this isn't bad. It's not good, and I don't see myself ever coming back to it, but it's not that terrible. I think I like it better than you, Tom, obviously.
You must, because you said something positive.
Yeah, because, honestly, there's some really decent hooks on this record, and overall, I think it's just a somewhat creative approach to modern pop music, but the cliches killed it for me.
Just like Mike, look, but you'll never be Brian Wilson. And I said, if crazy equals genius, if crazy equals genius, then I'm a fucking arsonist. I'm a rocket scientist.
Next up, we have an album from the Besnard Lakes called A Coliseum Complex Museum. Thank you for that wonderful album title, guys. That's great. This is indie rock, kind of on the psychedelic edge, and it's focused on surreal rock soundscapes and buttery vocal harmonies. I swear every song on this record is in the same key. These guys are trying to create a newish breed of rock, kind of like the Horrors or Django, Tom, that we reviewed a couple years ago, where the vocal melodies and the harmonies are designed to wrap the sound in a mood and atmosphere rather than provide hooks. And to me, this is all about sonic texture. I like the songs where you hear the melodic electric guitar because I feel like the songs have more of a haunting mood to them, and kind of like a Pink Floyd-like substance on the tracks where you hear the guitar. I like this record more the further on I listen to it. Like
Same
the back
here.
half of the
Yeah.
record, I think, was stronger than the front half.
Yeah, and records like that for me, I always want to revisit because I feel like by the end of it, I'm like, the fact that I liked it more by the end than I did at the beginning says maybe there's more going on here. And I think that what that is with the Besnard Lakes is that they have a lot of just layers of sound sitting on top. Mm-hmm. And it takes a lot of focus and a lot of listens to scrape that away before you actually get to the core of the songwriting and what they're putting together. And I have an inclination that I think they're doing some really cool stuff here. I don't think it's overwhelmingly brilliant, but I think it's good, and I don't feel like I really got that first time around. So I will be coming back to this, but if that's something that sounds appealing to anyone listening, I would certainly recommend it. Next up, we've got Tindersticks with their new album, The Waiting Room. I find this to be a hard style to describe. It sounded to me like if you picture Yola Tango, but they're all wearing suits and playing in like a dimly lit lounge or speakeasy. There's kind of this like dark undercurrent to it, but it's kind of mellow at the same time. There's something very alluring to me about this general sound. And while the songs aren't overly complex, I feel like each one was still made to carry a lot of weight and contribute to the overall album experience. There's more the depth coming out in the actual performances than there is in the writing. And I think that's a really nice trait because it's something that you don't see in music a lot these days. People tend to overthink things, but I think there's a lot to be said about writing a somewhat simple song, but just performing it with a lot of gusto and commitment. Because of that, everything in this band is very tight and deliberate in the performances, in the production, the general way that the album is presented. And to me, that's really cool. This is something that I'll want to come back to. And kind of like Besnard Lakes, Jake, as you mentioned, this is one that I liked by the end of the album a lot more than I did at first. They really convinced me.
Sure. I really like the intimate vocals on this record. I totally get that dimly lit jazz club feel you were describing, Tom, and to me, this didn't strike me as very interesting at first, but after a while, I started really digging some of the songwriting. This is original and subtle, and those are two qualities I find really intriguing in a record. So to me, this is definitely worth a few listens.
Where we once lived, where we once lived.
Moving on, we have the new album from Daughter, their second album titled Not to Disappear. Daughter's first album, If You Leave, was one that Jake and I really liked.
Yes.
Really good, intimate, indie rock, female vocals that are really wonderfully performed. Just a lot of emotion and a lot of atmosphere there. And all of those elements are present on Not to Disappear as well, but I feel like they're expanding their sound very subtly. This album's a little bit richer, more layered. They're incorporating some more electronic elements. Now, that's something that was there on their debut as well, but I feel like it's slightly more present, contributing more to the overall sound on this record. The biggest difference, I would say, though, is that the lyrics are a lot more direct, whereas their debut was a little more coy, a little more metaphorical, I would say. Here, it's very direct, so they're really hitting you right in the heartstrings. I mean, that's what they're going for. Reminded me a little bit of Wyoke or Braids. If you like the general aesthetic that either of those bands have, I would definitely recommend this one.
I agree with all of that, TD. Daughter's sound is all about building big climaxes filled with austere guitars, expansive drums, and subtle electronic layers that fill out the wall of sound. This approach adds a dynamic contrast that makes these songs very impactful, and coupling that with delicate yet impressive vocals and the improved and biting lyrics makes for a gripping experience. This album really impressed me and has me very excited about the direction of this group. This album, though, like, not getting a ton of love.
I don't really understand that, because to me it was one of the standouts of January.
Absolutely. We like this significantly more than I think most people are.
But you will not tell me that, 'cause you know it hurts me every time you say it, and you know you do.
Next up, we have the fourth album from Canadian heavy metal band Cauldron, titled In Ruin. Tom. Nostalgia metal.
Yep.
It's all built around the choruses and this like noodling electric guitar melodies you hear on every track, but neither provide convincing enough performances to pull off this sound that these guys are going for. This sounds so completely flaccid, not to mention warrantless. Give me a reason to care. Instead, I feel like I'm stuck listening to Van Halen meets Poison wannabe band.
Yeah.
No thanks.
No,
I'm done.
That's absolutely true. This is the kind of thing where the vocals just ruin it for me. They're not the kind of style of vocals I like in metal. They sound extremely uncommitted, and they're not intense at all. They're just very lackluster. And I think that actually goes along with the instrumentals as well. This is the kind of metal that might have sounded heavy in the late 70s.
Right.
But you're right on with the Poison or Van Halen thing. I mean, and actually I have some respect for early Van Halen, I will say, but this sounds closer to hair metal to me in actual sound. It's just that they're going for a little bit more diversity in the song structures. I know that this is a very niche metal genre, even within metal, but it really did not do it for me.
Empress, make the call. Your blades will never fall into eternal please. Endless conception at ease.
Next up is Anderson Paak, or is it Anderson Paak? I don't know. The album is called Malibu. Anderson was featured on Dr. Dre's newest album, Compton, and now this is his album to come out since then. And this is R&B, kind of soul-infused hip-hop, or maybe it's hip-hop-infused kind of soul and R&B. It's really hard for me to tell in which direction it leans, and that's actually something that I liked about it, is that you don't feel like it's predominantly one genre with hints of another. It feels like a true fusion, and I really like that about it. Reminds me a bit of like Miguel, Bilal, even D'Angelo in there a little bit, but also Kendrick Lamar in the way that some of this comes off is just kind of urban poetry. There's definitely a focus on the lyrics, but there's a lot of diversity in the instrumentation and the approach from the actual sound and style. I really respect that, but for me, it almost came off as feeling kind of saturated. There was so much going on that it was really tough for me to wrap my head around and really just live in the moment with this record and dig what was going on at the time. I think there are some great ideas here, and I liked it overall, but I can't say I was particularly blown away.
I'm not closing my tab. Don't it feel like it's been far too long, girl? Your heart don't stand a chance.
Next up, we have the latest release from California-based metal artist Megadeth. Their album, Dystopia. These guys are very prolific. They've been pumping out albums since the mid-'80s. To me, everything about this band screams geeky metal nerd. This is by far the least cool form of metal to me, and I'm just going to come out and say it. I'm typically not a Megadeth fan, and Dystopia just didn't do it for me. It's so flamboyantly self-indulgent. The guitar is squibbly and all over the place, the thrashy riffs are relentless, and the vocals simply do not pass the vocal test. If you like metal that is entirely self-serving and it's going to rock your face off and be screamingly dramatic, this is probably a solid record and you'll probably like it. To me, some really great instrumental performances. I just want something that's deeper.
I completely agree. And I actually traditionally am a Megadeth fan. I really like their 80s stuff. You know, it's stuff that I grew up with. While I don't go on Megadeth binges like I might some other bands like Iron Maiden and Metallica, still, I like this band in general. But man, I felt like this was a huge misstep. And a few of the things that really destroyed it for me are, first off, I just feel like the vocals are not up to snuff. They're not performed very well. I don't think they're written very well, but more so, and this is something that it has to be pretty bad to really ruin my listen, but the lyrics. I do not dig the overly preachy, politically based lyrics. And metal music has always kind of had this, but even Megadeth's earlier stuff, I feel like at least they were a little bit more satirical about it. They were doing it in a much more interesting way. There's really no metaphor here. There's nothing relatable. It just feels like they're being read from some kind of political pamphlet. And I really did not like that. The saving grace for me, if there was anything positive to say about this, is some of the instrumentals were pretty good, but they do feel somewhat warrantless, as you had pointed out, Jake. So overall, I was not impressed with this one.
When you don't know the legend ghost can hurt you. If you only want to live and die in a cage. There's panic and there's chaos rampant in the streets.
Next up, we have the latest release from Austin, Texas-based indie rock band Shearwater, titled Jet Plane and Oxbow. Very interesting album title, very provocative. What I like about this album, Tom, is twofold. Shearwater are definitely expanding their songwriting approach. These compositions are longer and sprawl out more to more interesting places than on Animal Joy, the record that came out in 2012, which we reviewed. The other thing I like is that though this album cranks up the usage of electronic elements a few notches, they use them in a way that doesn't distract too much from the ethereal sound that makes the band unique. This album doesn't blow me away at all. It's very enjoyable, at least the first half. But there's a few tracks at the end of the album I just didn't like very much.
Shuddering brakes on the road to Jerusalem. It's so easy to drift when your eyes are so tired.
And now we have the new album from Suede, or here in the States, the London Suede.
The States.
The States.
Yeah, we're from
That's
the
right.
States, aren't we?
The States.
The States.
God, that just sounds douchey.
You guys know where Iowa is? Do you have any idea where Iowa is?
Jake, do you know where Iowa is?
Most of the time I don't.
Right.
Most of the time I don't. We're just stuck in a cornfield somewhere,
Right.
not pronouncing things correctly.
Right. The new album from Suede is Night Thoughts, and Suede is a pretty classic British group. This album, coming off of Blood Sports, which was kind of a resurgence for them, kind of a return to the scene. It is a little bit more atmospheric, a little bit moodier than Blood Sports, but still, I don't feel like it's really all that different. I don't think they're really putting any kind of unique stamp on this album. There are some good moments, but overall, I actually found that I felt like it dragged a little bit because there's just not a lot of intensity, not a lot of up-tempo moments. It's just kind of, an enjoyable enough listen, but not something I got overly excited about.
To me, these guys have always been a bit formulaic. That's what they originally brought to that mid-'80s Smiths-based sound that really launched the Brit rock movement. And I feel like that formula, though, is such a double-edged sword because these songs are very pop-structured, and I think it, in the end, when you put a compilation of a bunch of pop-structured songs together, it just makes the album listen not that strong, and this album completely fits that bill. Next up, we have the 8th studio record in 8 years from Ty Segall. Emotional Mugger? That's what this one's called?
Emotional Mugger, that's right. And this is pretty much everything I've come to expect from Ty Segall. I mean, definitely one of the most prolific artists out there right now. His solo stuff, but then also he's working with tons of other groups. He released the second Fuzz album last year, which he also is in that group. I mean, this guy is just working his ass off at all times. And he makes some really great kind of throwback rock music. It's kind of psychedelic rock meets this kind of like garage punk feel, with also some like early Black Sabbath, I would say. A very, very endearing sound that he pulls off really well. I didn't like this one quite as much as Manipulator, which was his last solo release. But still, I like it while it's on. It's not something I'm probably going to come back to all the time, but this guy's a hell of a lot of fun to listen to.
Next up, we have the third release from New York-based synth-pop duo Chairlift. This album's called Moth. I gotta say, I've always been intrigued by this band, not because of their music, but because of the band title. Chairlift has always been my favorite ride at amusement parks. One of them. Seriously, you get to survey the whole park and look down on everyone else there, like, I'm superior to you, I'm up on a chair, I could fall out at any time.
I seriously thought you were joking when you said that, but you're being absolutely serious.
Of course I'm serious, Tom, you know me.
Oh my gosh.
Chairlift are never going to be my favorite artist, but I appreciate what they are doing here on Moth, where 2012's album Something was squarely in that all-too-familiar vein of electronic pop music. Chairlift are clearly trying to push their sound further on Moth by incorporating a wider range of sounds and samples. You can hear them experimenting with horn backings and more aggressive beats on this record. What remains are the belting female vocals that are reminiscent of Imogen Heap, always there to provide that catchy hook to all the songs. I'd say that the biggest thing going against Moth is track disparity. Some of these songs just seemed a bit cheap and formulaic to me, whereas others were much more interesting.
Yeah, I found this to be considerably better than Something, but it's still not really my cup of tea. I just thought that this one was a little more convincing. I also want to point out how odd the sentence, I enjoyed this more than Something, would sound if you didn't know that Something was their previous record. I enjoyed this more than Something. I don't know what. Next up is Cross Record with their album Wabi Sabi. This is experimental indie rock to me. It's very sample-based. It's very mood and atmosphere-oriented with very intimate, close, softly sung female vocals. I just found this album to be incredibly good. and it's really hard to put my finger on why, because I think if you listen to this, you'll find that a lot of the individual elements going on here are really present in other artists. If you're a fan of like Glasser, Grouper, Chelsea Wolfe, I think you might like this.
Sharon Van Etten.
Sharon Van Etten, definitely, in kind of the mood and the vocal approach as well. But this was just definitely right up my alley. I found the instrumentation and the varied approach there, what they're incorporating with samples and the way that it's produced and performed, to just be incredibly gripping. So this is actually probably my favorite record of the month of January, and I can't recommend it enough.
I would totally agree with you there, Tom. This is easily my favorite record of the month. To me, I really like the distorted, drony guitars. I felt like they added a sense of despair to the tracks. Lots of the vocals were very layered, I found, and belting out through just a myriad of instrumentation and percussion. This had a very organic sound built around acoustic and electric guitars and real percussion, no drum beats. It all comes off very authentic to me. The songwriting here I found to be particularly strong. These songs felt more like movements that flow from one part to the next, adhering to no formula and providing beautiful, haunting chord progressions. This, to me, it's an unexpected gem, and I'm definitely coming back to this and will continue to for the rest of the year.
Our next album from January is the self-titled debut release from Nevermen. This is a collaboration between Tunde from TV on the Radio, Mike Patton from Faith No More, Mr. Bungle et al., and rapper Adam Drucker. This, I will give them this. It feels like a true collaboration.
For sure.
Sometimes you get these collaborative groups, these kind of super groups, if you will, that you feel like you get primarily one influence. I feel like these guys are really working together, and that interplay, that kind of rapid, especially in the vocals, that rapid fire kind of back and forth in the vocals is pretty impressive to me from a stylistic standpoint. And I like to see when artists that are already well established and good at what they do can still work with well with others. However, I do feel like the end result here isn't really all that impressive or fun to listen to. It's a little bit all over the place. It's just a smattering of ideas that I don't feel like really come to fruition all that solidly.
Next up, we have an album from an artist called Cian Nugent called Night Fiction. I've never heard of this artist before, and I found this style to be something that, to be honest, I'm kind of predisposed to. I like folk singer-songwriter, and that's certainly the style that this album is in. Tom, I noticed in your notes you mentioned Fionn Reagan, Cass McCombs. Certainly those artists come to mind with this sound. And with a name like Cian Nugent, you would think it would be much more bright and heavy metal based, or some sort of like
the lesser known Motor City Madman.
Right. So to me, this is really just an interesting blend of styles. Definitely a lot of folk and singer-songwriter, like I said, but also I noticed a great driving southern rock vibe. Lots of nice melodic lead guitar over a more distorted rhythm guitar that often squeals about. This sound, it sounds really familiar without being overly predictable. Some of these tracks are pretty long, and they feel long too, which suggests that the songwriting sags a bit too much to justify the length of the songs and therefore the album as well.
There may be only one difference between the hopeless and the brave. One's too specific, and the other's too...
Next up, we've got Turin Breaks with their album Lost Property. To me, this felt like a slightly poppier, less exciting Dr. Dog. This is just rock music. It's kind of indie rock, but it's really well polished. The production is terrific. It's very sharp. It's quite varied. So you get a lot of difference from track to track just in terms of the styles they're trying to incorporate, the kind of mood they're going for with this indie rock songwriting. But overall, I just feel like there weren't a whole lot of ideas backing up the song. songwriting, and the presentation felt a little bit sterile to me.
Tom, I think I like this significantly more than you did. I totally got a 90s alternative rock vibe from this. The vocals reminded me of Youth Lagoon a lot, and I think that is where we disagree. As we've noted before, Tom, vocals are a way that, like, I think artists really deliver a lot of emotion, and that's what resonates with me first. Whereas I think you're looking for that emotional warrant in the instrumentation, and I can see why that wouldn't maybe come out as much on just with the presentation here, because the vocals are very emotive. This is certainly poppy, but not in a commercial sort of way, more in a Beatlesque polished sort of manner. Lots of melody from the vocals, guitars, even the string backings, piano and bass. This goes all over the place stylistically, mixing popular tracks with ballads and more alternative tracks, all while keeping within the same sonic motifs. And I just want to give a special shout out to the track Keep Me Around. I thought it was a great track, definitely on my favorites list for the month.
What lies above? If I am all you found, and if
Next up, we have the latest release from American rapper Saul Williams. The album is titled "MartyrLoserKing." I've never heard of Saul Williams before. Tom has informed me that he's done some work with Nine Inch Nails before.
Yeah, on Year Zero, the remix album, as well as some backup vocals on Survivalism, I believe.
So with that description, and then I put on MartyrLoserKing, the first thing I thought of was, what the hell am I listening to? This isn't anything, I can't describe what this sounds like, and I really like that.
Yeah,
'cause
it's quite unique.
It's so original, it's so unique. All I can think of is that this started off as like a really nice sounding record, but then Saul Williams dropped it off the top floor balcony of some sleazy hotel, and I got banged up in the head a bit, you know? This definitely has like a Wesley Willis factor to it in some of the vocal presentation, but not in the way that this is like something that you should laugh at. This is a pretty serious album. It has a lot of complex beats, interesting off-putting electronic melodies. The vocals remind me of both Death Grips and Clipping at times, which I like, but less abrasive than either of those examples. I also got a TV on the radio vibe to the sound.
I definitely got that too, as well as mixed with a little bit of Ghost Poet, who's another kind of experimental hip hop artist from the UK. But this, it's an album that I respect more than I enjoy, even because of its experimental nature and because of its originality. There's a lot of good stuff going on here. Doesn't quite have that comeback quality for me, but I still was very impressed by it.
Met this girl on Friday night, Rocky Hour picture night, Cuban stogie karaoke, purple satin bra and tights. That's what I was wearing. She was wearing red and purple light. White smoke had bright hopes. Keep there, straight ghosts, flow bass and topaz.
Next up, we have Suicide Songs, an album from an English-based alternative rock band named Money. I've never listened to this band before. Listening to Suicide Songs, this album is getting a lot of hype, and to me, it's very understandable as to why. The sound is fairly original and grand in its presentation. Washy guitar and layers of strings provide this whimsical backdrop. The male vocals are belted out, but often buried in the mix. However, that production is somewhat appealing, as it makes you listen closely to the vocal melodies and the lyrics, which are both performed very well. This isn't a background record. It needs to be listened to with intent. When you do listen to it with intent, it's very appealing, and the sound is just very hard to classify. It reminds me a bit more of indie sounding My Morning Jacket or Bright Eyes if they were good, or even listenable.
I'm just a strange human looking for love. Do you dare to come down?
And now we're at the new album from Bloc Party, which is called Hymns. a very apt album title,
Sure.
considering this is quite a left turn for this band who are known as being kind of the front runners of the early 2000s, just nice, thrashy, energetic British rock scene. And now they take a drastic left turn and they put out an album that has a lot of religious and spiritual imagery. I guess they've said that they're not really trying for it to be religious in any kind of particular way, but it certainly feels that way when you listen to it. Their drummer and their bass player left in recent years since their last album came out, 4, which we actually liked pretty well, Jake. So they've got a new bass player, new drummer. The bass player is actually Justin from Menomina, so that's kind of interesting. But with that, they took a very drastic change in sound, and it's one that, to be perfectly honest, I did not enjoy. There's a lot of synths here. There's drum machines. The sound is kind of sparse, but more the songwriting and the whole presentation of it just comes off to me as sounding very cheesy. It's kind of a thin mix, and there's nothing really to beef up or support any of the ideas, which to me just don't really feel fully developed and aren't very well executed. Even the vocalist, who historically I really liked on past Bloc Party albums, I don't feel like his performance is overly strong here. I will definitely acknowledge and respect just the commitment to the ideas and the emotion he's trying to put into it, but I just don't think that really the tonality and the vocal chops are necessarily there to support it. So for me, this album feels like a huge misstep. I really did not like it, but I still will keep up with this band and see what they have going. I'm glad that they're still at it in general, but man, this one was tough for me.
Help me overcome it. For only He can heal me with His touch.
Next up, we have the 7th studio album from Australian singer-songwriter Sia, called This Is Acting. Really, I wasn't very surprised by what I heard here. This is entirely focused on Sia's vocal performance, and particularly the sound is centered around her unique voice. These songs are designed to be singles in the traditional pop number structure of verse, chorus, verse, chorus. The sound is comprised of a beat that's a step above a generic drum machine. Got a lot of electronic melodies and synths that fill out the sound with an occasional piano. Each song has a big, sugary, hooked out chorus. It's very generic and engineered sounding, also a complete waste of your time, in my opinion.
Yeah, I was not impressed by this album, and actually I really like Sia in general significantly more than many other pop artists in her vein, if you could compare people like Kesha and Katy Perry and people like that in kind of the dance pop vein. I like Sia better because she's traditionally a songwriter first and a performer second.
Not on this record.
Right, exactly. That's what I did not like about it. You basically summed it up right there, Jake. I like the rhythmic approach, and I like the fact that she can focus on rhythm as well as melody, but man, the big disconnect for me is just that she's singing with a lot of emotion, but the lyrics aren't there to back it up. If you're that dedicated to what you're singing, then what you're singing should be somewhat moving and relatable. And here I just felt like the lyrics fell flat. They were generic, and this was just a track-by-track album that really didn't do anything for me. Next up is Dream Theater with their new album, The Astonishing. Dream Theater are a classic progressive rock, progressive metal group, but it's metal along the lines of not your throaty, screaming metal, but more along your kind of operatic, very grandiose metal. Despite this huge scope of this album, I mean, this album's like multiple hours long, and so many tracks that I honestly don't even remember. A lot of interludes. This is, a concept record. Despite that grand scope, this actually sounds a little bit poppier for Dream Theater as they choose to, break the album out into these more tracks with the interludes rather than having fewer tracks that are just longer and more sprawling. I think that this is one of those albums that's going to be great for diehard fans of the band who just want to hear more Dream Theater content. But I don't think that this is really going to turn on new fans because I don't think they're doing anything overly new or interesting here. They've just got a lot of content. And if that's something that you would like to sit and chew on for 2.5 hours, I think that you're naturally going to love it. For others, I wouldn't necessarily recommend starting here.
Please don't stop on my account. Show us what we learned so much about.
Next up, we have the debut record from British band Milk Teeth called Vile Child. Milk Teeth, just in looking these guys up, they're classified as a punk rock band, but Vile Child, like I would classify as more spastic, grungy alternative rock with tinges of, you know, shoegaze and post-hardcore. So
Yeah.
I wouldn't really go for like the punk. I maybe at like a very high level you could classify this, but didn't really come off that way to me. Huge washy walls of guitar fired out at you as the female vocalist belts out her rather nice vocal melodies. Kind of reminds me of less jarring version of Sleater Kenny's vocals. The male vocalist here, there's two vocalists. The male vocalist adds the post-hardcore element, screaming out in angsty fashion on a number of these tracks. The dichotomy of the post-hardcore and the neo-shoegaze grunge sound makes this unique and strangely appealing to me. The more I listen, the more bored I become, though.
Yeah, and the more that I like it, the more frustrated that I get because I feel like there's more potential here than they're actually utilizing. I love this whole 90s kind of throwback sound. I'm a sucker for it. And there are a lot of bands out there that are doing this really well, like Speedy Ortiz, Bully, Dilly Dally, and several others. And I feel like Milk Teeth fall kind of in that realm, but they're doing this well. The thing that frustrated me about this record, and I actually come out and say I still really liked it overall, but I just want to see them do even more. The thing that frustrated me is that they start this album with a track that features the male vocalist. So that sets a precedent. It creates an expectation. And the next like 4 or 5 tracks are the female vocalist, who I'm just waiting the whole time to go into some kind of Courtney Love style freak out that never really happens until you get the male vocalist again in the middle of the album. And they really only actually collaborate and sing together on a couple of tracks. So I want to see a lot more interplay there because I feel like this band has a lot of potential that they're just not really fully utilizing. Moving on now to the new album by Your Friend called Gumption. Your Friend is the name of the artist. I'm not just talking about some friend of yours.
You assume, Tom, that I have friends.
That's true. Jake, this is not by your friend. Because I'm your only friend.
Yeah,
right? No.
And you didn't write it.
No, I did not. But this is indie pop, indie rock. It's all about constant atmosphere with just a very clear-cut vocal melody piercing through the mix and sitting on top. The closest comparison I could make is maybe Youth Lagoon or Beach House, maybe with some mutual benefit thrown in there. If you like those artists, you might like this.
Yeah, Tom, this really reminds me of Beach House and the slow melodic vocals. The music is a bit more expansive in its breadth and songwriting, but not overly so. It's very much the same lethargic, washy style. I kind of like this, but mainly because it's what I've imagined Beach House's song would evolve to, you know? And overall, this really isn't the most engaging listen. There aren't any tracks that I feel are absolutely brilliant, so it's just pretty good.
But all my gumption rests in a vein.
Next, we have the latest release from Night Beats, Who Sold My Generation. This reminds me of some of the classic rock revival sounds that have been popular as of late. The sound here is built around repeating drums, clangy, distorted guitars mixed low in the mix with a bit of fuzz on them, big bass lines, and a nerdy-sounding male singer who speaks lackluster vocal melodies over the top of everything. It's clear that these guys are going for that Walkman sort of feel to their sound, but this sounds tired and devoid of original ideas. I'm really just not digging it.
But you have to say, Jake, I mean, they are right. the Who did sell My Generation.
That is exactly that's a fact.
They sold a lot of it.
A lot of it. It got them pretty big.
And now we have the new album from Wet, Don't You.
Forget about me.
Oh, God damn it.
I'm just kidding. I don't want to. That's the only reason I wanted you to kick it off. I didn't actually want. I don't care.
No, it's too late. You dug your own grave with this one. So what'd you think about this album?
Oh, man. It just wasn't very good.
Yeah.
We were first exposed to Wet, Tom.
Please tell me about when we were first exposed to Wet Tom.
Let's just not do this album. Let's just not even fucking bring it up.
Okay.
We're not going to be able to get through this, seriously. All right, Wet released an album called Don't You. I would describe Wet sound as electronic-based pop music with a female lead and lots. I got nothing. Let's just not do this one. There's nothing here to say. This is a bad synth pop record. Indie electronic synth pop. That's what this is. It's not very good.
Case closed.
Case closed. There was a song that I liked from Music League, and it was on this album, and that was the reason why I was like, oh, we should listen to this and talk about it. But then the rest of the album was really crap. And it actually, the experience of the crappiness of this record made that one song that I liked made me like it less.
Feel myself closing up. Stay open and stay close to me. It's so much harder than it seems. You seem tired of my excuses. I'm so tired from all this loose.
Last, we're going to get a bit self-indulgent here because my friend Tom, I love Tom's music. He's always been a fantastic songwriter for as long as I've known him, and I've known him since he was 12. Tom and our friend Mike released an album under the moniker The Han Solo Project called The Force Hits Snooze. Tom,
That's right.
I gotta say, I've listened to this record a couple times. I find it to be completely endearing and funny at the same time. What would you describe what you and Mike were doing on the Han Solo project?
I mean, it's really it's a project that actually goes back about 8 years, where Mike and I wanted to create an album of Star Wars themed songs, just because we both like Star Wars and we thought it'd be fun. And we kind of tabled that until Mike brought it back up in light of the new Star Wars movie coming out and saying, hey, why don't we actually do this? So it's an album that we didn't put a whole lot of time into. We kind of hammered it out over just a couple of months and released it in mid-January. So it's totally a novelty thing. It's a fun album. It's just a barrage of styles of various alternative rock with Star Wars themed lyrics. So if that sounds like something that you'd be into, I would definitely recommend you check it out. But I doubt it's going to be anyone's album of the year.
And just so you guys know, you can find it on Spotify under the Han Solo Project.
That is true.
So, Tom, that wraps up our January 2016 monthly wrap up, where we at a high level cover what we thought of the new albums that came out. Did you have any favorites in there that we want to highlight for everyone?
I think my three favorites would definitely be Cross Record, David Bowie, and Daughter. I would highly recommend all those.
And I know this is lame, but I totally agree with you.
Mm-hmm.
The only one I would add on to that is Turin Breaks, Lost Property. I really liked, and I know I like that one a lot more than you did.
Sure.
So I'm going to be a pain in the butt and pick 4. But I really liked those 4 records and would recommend them. Were there a few that you would just recommend avoiding that were kind of surprise dislikes?
The couple of metal albums we included, which was Cauldron and Megadeth, I was not a fan of. Also Hinds and Panic at the Disco. Those were tough for me.
Sure. And Tom, as we said at the beginning of this podcast, we're already a week into February, so some albums have already been coming out this month, but there's a lot of albums that still have yet to come out, Animal Collective being one of those.
Yep.
February has the potential to be a very prolific month for album releases, and I'm really excited for a couple artists. Are there any other artists that you're particularly excited about that have a release coming out in February?
Definitely the new Animal Collective. I'm always eager to see what they're doing next. Same thing with Sun Kill Moon. Yuck has an album coming out, which there's a huge difference between their debut and their second album, so I'm looking forward to seeing where they go next. Lucinda Williams, classic artist, she's got a new one as well, so plenty more to cover in the coming month.
All right, guys, let Tom and I know what your favorite albums from January were and what albums that came out you really just didn't like that you listened to. Also, what albums are you most excited about to hear us talk about in February that are coming out? Because we are very excited for new music in 2016. Next week, Tom and I are going to talk about the Grammys. The Grammys are coming up on February 15th, and it's a subject that Tom and I get to talking about this time of year every year, and that there's a ton of Grammy nominations, and we really want to jump into our thoughts of those nominations and kind of do a before and after look at the Grammys over the next couple of weeks. So be sure to tune in for those podcasts. Thank you guys for your continued support and participation with Velocities in Music. Tom and I love all of your comments on our YouTube videos, Facebook messages, and emails to us. Your participation is what makes Velocities in Music possible. So, as always, thank you for being awesome. I'm Jake.
I'm Tom.
We are Velocities in Music, moving music discussion forward.